Nobody taught you how to sell what you know. They taught you how to work, how to endure, and how to keep quiet about both. This is a story about what happens when a person stops enduring and starts doing. Dorothy Haskell stood at the post office counter in Terre Haute, Indiana, waiting for a money order from her daughter, the one Karen had promised 2 weeks ago for blood pressure medication. The clerk counted it out loud, with 3 people in line behind her. $40 even. Behind Dorothy, a woman in a fur-trimmed coat shifted half a step sideways, the way people move away from someone else's trouble, careful not to let it touch them. Friends, write in the comments, where are you from, and does your social security last you to the end of the month? We need to know who's listening. And hit that like button so this story reaches the people who need it right now. The letter from the Social Security Administration arrived on a Tuesday. Dorothy opened it standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down felt like giving the envelope too much respect. The last review had been promised since summer. 28 years of work history, all documented, no errors possible. There was an error. Dear Ms. Haskell, based on a review of your earnings record, your monthly Social Security benefit has been adjusted to $1,140, effective November 1st. If you believe this determination is incorrect, you may file an appeal within 60 days. Processing time, approximately 4 months. It had been $1,580. Now it was $1,140. $440 had simply vanished, as though 28 years behind a cafeteria steam table weighed less than the government thought a year ago, less than one winter month costs in Terre Haute. She pulled a spiral notebook from the kitchen drawer. The pen was behind the toaster, a ballpoint from the dentist's office, the kind with the cap that never stays on. Dorothy wrote slowly, in large letters, because her reading glasses were scratched and new ones cost $140. Social Security, $1,140. Rent, $875, and that was the senior housing rate, the one with the mildew stain on the bathroom ceiling they'd been promising to fix since March. Medications, lisinopril, amlodipine, knee cream that barely worked, $145 if she bought generics. Medicare plus Medigap plus copays, $280. Groceries, $340. Pasta, canned vegetables, chicken thighs once a week, coffee so cheap it tasted like hot water with a grudge. Utilities, $195. Gas for the 2004 Corolla with 211,000 miles that started on the 3rd try, $95. Total, -$350. She circled the number and stared at it the way people stare at a diagnosis when they've been hoping it would come back clean. She'd been short before, on $1,580, reused tea bags, skipped the knee cream, ate oatmeal for dinner. Now there was nothing left to manage. -$350 meant some pill wouldn't get swallowed. She called Karen. Karen lived in Indianapolis, worked at an insurance company, drove a Hyundai Tucson, and called twice a month to talk about the kitchen renovation. Quartz countertops, the island Greg said cost too much. Dorothy listened, agreed, felt happy for her daughter, the way only people who've stopped expecting anything for themselves can be happy for others. They cut my Social Security, she said. Records mix-up, down to $1,140. That's obviously a mistake. You should appeal. I did. 4 months. See, they'll fix it, Mum. Karen's voice relaxed, and in that see, Dorothy heard what she'd been hearing for years. The relief of a person who'd found a reason not to help right now. Karen, I need $200. I can't cover meds and rent both. Silence on the line. Someone laughing in the distance, a spoon clinking against a mug. There, in Indianapolis, in the warm office with the quartz countertops on the way, another life was happening. One where negative 350 was a rounding error. Mum, let me talk to Greg. You know, the car payment, Jess needs braces. Talk to him, Dorothy said, and hung up. Next morning, a text on the flip phone, the letters crawling out one by one. Mum, sorry things are tight, RN. Greg says maybe after the holidays? Love you. After the holidays. 2 months. As if negative 350 was a show you could pause. Dorothy set the phone face down and went to the kitchen. The glass jar with the sourdough starter sat by the window, covered with a damp cloth, same as every morning for 20 years. 2 tablespoons of flour, half a cup of warm water, stir with the wooden spoon. The starter had risen overnight and smelled of warm dough with a faint, almost fruity undertone. That note Miss B. Winslow, head cook at South Vigo High, used to describe. Dot, if it smells like bread, you're golden. If it smells like nail polish, dump it and start over. In 20 years, Dorothy had never started over. Her hands did the familiar thing while her mind counted the unfamiliar. 12 days until the 25th, rent due date. $875. If she didn't pay, the sequence was late fee, then a notice slid under the door, then a phone call from the property manager, a woman named Diane who wore clip-on earrings and spoke in the third person about the building's policy, as if the building itself had feelings to protect. Dorothy knew that sequence the way she knew cinnamon roll dough, by heart, by repetition, and because both were matters of survival. After lunch, she drove to Fulton's Market on Maple, the small grocery where Tammy, the owner, a broad-shouldered woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, sometimes set aside marked-down items for regulars. Dorothy picked up flour, got in line, and reaching for her wallet, saw it. On the bulletin board by the door, a handwritten index card in blue marker. Homemade baked goods wanted for consignment. Ask Tammy. She read it. Paid. Drove home in the November rain, Terre Haute smelling of wet pavement and wood smoke, thinking that homemade baked goods was for younger women who knew how to photograph food and print labels, not for a 66-year-old with bad knees and a 350 deficit. She was a cook. Had been a cook. Had been, because now she was a retiree whose monthly shortfall equaled a week of groceries. At home, she sat at the table. The notebook lay open, the circled number staring. Then Dorothy turned to a blank page and wrote different numbers. Not expenses, but ingredients, from the part of her memory that had spent 28 years counting ounces and dozens. Flour, butter, sugar, cinnamon, cream cheese for frosting. About 85 cents per roll. Sell at $3.50, $2.65 profit each. 40 rolls, $106. In 2 days, half the rent. Outside it got dark. The streetlight came on and lit the jar on the counter. The starter had risen further, pushing against the cloth. A moth tapped against the window screen, persistent and stupid, and Dorothy watched it for a moment before turning back to the numbers. The kitchen smelled of something that tightened her throat. Not hunger. Something she had no word for. Like determination kneaded with fear, the way cinnamon roll dough is kneaded with butter. She took the flour from the cabinet, butter from the fridge, the cutting board, took out the rolling pin, from the school kitchen, the one they let her keep in 2012 when the district outsourced. Uncovered the starter. At 11 p.m. she was rolling dough, and she was thinking that at 5 she'd proof it, mix the filling, roll it tight, cut rounds, frost them warm, and by 9, walk into Fulton's with a tray covered in parchment. She hadn't figured out what to say, but the dough was rising. Dorothy was up at 4:30, not by alarm, but by the habit 28 years had pressed into her body, deeper than any clock could reach. The body remembered. 4:30, up. 5, dough. 6, oven. The fact that the school cafeteria closed 12 years ago was something the body didn't know. The starter had risen exactly right. Tangy, warm with sweetness on top and breadiness underneath. The kitchen was cold. The thermostat was set to 62 because every degree above that cost money she didn't have. She worked in silence by the stove light, the overhead fluorescent off because it buzzed and flickered and made everything look like a hospital. Softened butter creamed with brown sugar and cinnamon spread across the rolled dough. She rolled it tight, not too tight or the center goes dense, not too loose or the layers separate. This was the moment you couldn't learn from a recipe card. The tension in the roll, the give of dough under the palms. Dorothy had learned it from Ms. B in 1987, not by reading, but by standing next to her for 3 months until her own hands knew. She cut the roll with dental floss, Ms. B's trick because a knife crushes the layers and floss slices clean. 40 rounds on 2 sheet pans. Into the oven at 350. 25 minutes by the kitchen clock, because the old gas oven had no timer. At 20 minutes, the smell reached the hallway. Not the mall Cinnabon sugar blast. The sourdough gave it something yeast cannot. A faintly nutty, almost caramel undertone that made you want not to eat, but to remember. The school cafeteria tray sliding on the metal rail, the lunch lady who said, "Just one," but sometimes winked and gave you 2. That smell was a time machine, more accurate than any photograph. She frosted them warm, cream cheese, powdered sugar, vanilla, a pinch of salt, spread with the back of a spoon, not a knife, because a knife tears the top layer. 40 rolls in a parchment-lined box. 9:15, Fulton's Market. Tammy raised an eyebrow. Dorothy set the box on the counter. "I'm here about the sign. Cinnamon rolls. Sourdough." Tammy opened the box, picked one up, turned it, pressed the top. It sprang back. $3.50 each. I've got Pillsbury in the freezer for $1.29. Pillsbury is Pillsbury. Try one. Tammy broke off a piece, chewed slowly with the look of someone performing expertise. She wasn't a baker, but she'd been selling other people's food for 20 years and liked to show that the decision was hers. She chewed, paused, looked at the roll like it had said something surprising, broke off another piece. "All right, 40, $3.50. Don't sell by closing. You pick them up. I owe you nothing." Dorothy walked out into the cold. The parking lot was mostly empty. A pickup truck, a minivan with a car seat visible through the window, Tammy's Honda by the side door. Dorothy sat in the Corolla for a moment before turning the key. She hadn't felt this specific nervousness since her first day at the school cafeteria in 1984, when she'd stood in front of a commercial oven she'd never used, and Ms. B had said, "It's just a bigger version of the one at home, Dot. Everything in cooking is." Tammy called at 1 p.m. "Miss Haskell, what did you put in those? They're gone. All 40, 3 hours. A woman bought 6, said it tasted like the cafeteria at South Vigo, hadn't had anything like it in 30 years. A guy in a Carhartt jacket bought 4, ate 1 right at the register. People are asking." Dorothy sat down in the hallway, wherever her legs gave out. $106 net, in 1 day. 5 days of that, rent. 10, a month of medications. She fed the starter, pulled out the notebook, turned to a clean page, wrote income. That page hadn't existed before. 3 days she baked 40 and drove them to Fulton's. 3 days sold out by noon. On the 4th, Tammy said, "That woman came back for 5 more. Said she sat in her car and had to pull herself together before she could drive. She keeps asking if you do anything besides cinnamon rolls." The weekend, Karen invited her to Jess's 14th birthday. $50 in gas round trip, $25 for a gift, a book and a hair clip, all she could manage. Karen's apartment smelt of new furniture and a plug-in candle. Greg at the head of the table, big, broad, pouring wine. Guests discussing mortgage rates. Dorothy set a Tupperware of 12 rolls on the table. Greg reached first, bit in, then turned to Karen across the table, in front of everyone. "Karen, I hear your mum's got a little side hustle, selling cinnamon rolls at a gas station." "Not a gas station," Dorothy said evenly. "A grocery store, on consignment." "Right, consignment," he smirked, pushed the roll aside. "Mum, you're 66 years old. Don't you think it's a little embarrassing? A retiree selling baked goods from a card table? What are people going to say?" Karen said nothing, looked at her plate. One friend studied a napkin. Jess dropped her eyes and scooted back. "I'm not selling from a card table," Dorothy said. "I'm baking." "Sure, maybe set up an Etsy shop. Grandma's cinnamon rolls, free shipping." Someone at the table laughed, quiet, almost inaudible. Karen still didn't speak, didn't push back. The silence of agreement without the courage to say it out loud. Dorothy helped clear the table and went to the small room. Lay down without changing, face to the wall. Didn't cry, wasn't in her nature, but couldn't sleep. Through the wall, laughter, glasses, music. 12 rolls untouched on the table. $42 she could have sold, brought as a gift to people who didn't want them. At 6 a.m. she left a note. "Happy birthday, Jess. Love, Grandma," and drove home. On the road she counted. 50 in gas, 25 for the gift, 2 days of lost sales, about 300 total. But she wasn't counting only money. She was counting the distance between herself and her daughter, measured not in miles, but in Karen's silence when Greg said, "Embarrassing." That distance had grown in one visit more than in the previous year, and Dorothy understood it wasn't going to shrink. Home at noon, uncovered the starter, and froze. Unfed for 2 days, it had collapsed, grey liquid on top, and instead of the usual warm smell, a sharp acetone reek. Ms. B's voice. "Nail polish? Dump it." Dorothy didn't dump it. Skimmed the liquid, added flour and warm water, covered the jar. If the starter was alive, morning would tell. If not, 20 years ended right here, in this kitchen. That waiting, not for money, not for the appeal, not for her daughter's conscience, but for living dough in a jar, turned out to be the hardest thing all month. 4 a.m. She was at the counter before the alarm, lifted the cloth. The starter had risen, not as high as usual, an inch instead of 2, but risen, and smelling right, tangy, warm, a thread of sweetness, alive. That evening, Tammy called. "Where'd you disappear? People asking for 2 days. That woman came again. Does your baker do anything else? Tell her I'm the customer whose car cries." Dorothy stood at the window, hands smelling of dough, legs aching, back hurting. 66, bad knees, $11.40 a month. All true. But also true, 3-hour sellouts, a stranger crying in her car over a taste she hadn't had in 30 years, and the neighbour upstairs knocking to buy 3 for her grandson. 5 days until rent, half the money. And Dorothy knew, not believed, not hoped, but knew, that tomorrow she'd bake 40 more, and that her hands remembered more than any letter from the Social Security Administration. By December, Dorothy baked 120 a day, and that number had become something like a pulse. If the morning went right, by 9 o'clock, 3 trays of 40 stood on the counter, frosted and wrapped, and the day was real. 3 stores, Tammy at Fulton's, Dale's Grocery on Wabash, and the gas station deli by the Greyhound stop, where the woman whose car cries had recommended her. 3 routes, And her neighbour Jean, a lean, quiet man of 62 with a 2004 Silverado the colour of pond algae, delivered them for $20 a day. Jean had shown up on his own. "I see you hauling boxes like a pack mule. Let me drive." Dorothy refused from pride, her knees overruled after the third trip on foot, when the left one swelled so she climbed the stairs, gripping the railing with both hands. Jean turned out to be silent, punctual, and indifferent to cinnamon rolls. The perfect driver. Mid-December arithmetic. 120 at 350, 420 gross. Minus ingredients, about 170. Minus Jean, 20. Net, 230 on a good day. Good days were half. Truck won't start, store won't take a full tray, dough doesn't proof. Average, 150 a day. 6 days a week, 24 working days a month. Total, about 3,600 net. Plus Social Security, 1140. 4740 a month. And Dorothy, who 3 months ago had circled negative 350, now wrote numbers that made her mouth go dry. Not from greed, but from unfamiliarity. She bought a second oven, countertop electric, used, 350 from neighbour Valerie. It heated more evenly. Rolls came out uniform, not spotty like from the gas oven where one side always browned faster. 2 ovens cut baking from 4 hours to 3, and that extra hour she spent on things she'd never had the money or nerve for. She signed Jess up for SAT prep, 150 a month, paid without asking Karen. Called Jess. "Consider this a late birthday present." Silence, then, "Grandma, are you serious?" In a voice that kept Dorothy holding the phone a full minute after the call ended. The fridge got a pork roast. Medications, bought in full, including the prescription knee cream she'd been substituting with a dollar store tube that did about as much good as rubbing her knee with optimism. Cardiologist, $250 for the visit, an amount that a month ago equaled catastrophe and now equaled less than 2 days' work. Dorothy Haskell felt like a person. Not surviving, not scrimping, a person with work, income, and a morning worth waking for at 4:30. Jean went on a bender the 3rd week of December. Monday. Dorothy outside with 3 trays, 20 degrees, stamping on ice. 8:15. No answer. 9. Jean's wife Donna, flat and tired. "He's down since yesterday. Don't wait." Hung up like closing a lid. 3 trays on the bench, cooling. She drove one to Tammy, returned, drove another to Dale's. Gas station too far, knee swelling by the second trip, so she climbed the stairs, gripping the railing. 40 rolls unsold. $140 gone. Jean didn't appear for 4 days. 2 outlets instead of 3, 80 rolls instead of 120. A third of income evaporated. On day 4, Jean at the door, sober, crumpled. "Sorry, it happens." Dorothy, "I lost $280. It happens." Jean shrugged. "I'm not your employee, doing you a favour." He was right. No contract, no obligation. Dorothy closed the door, knowing her income hung on 3 threads, and any could snap. 5 days later, a different thread. Thursday. Tammy didn't look up from the counter. "Not taking yours next week. Larissa Kowalski brought cinnamon rolls, $250 each." Larissa Kowalski. Pillsbury tubes, puffy, bland, frosting like sweetened shortening, but $1 cheaper. "Tammy, you tasted mine. You know the difference." "I do." Uncomfortable, honest eyes. "But I've got a store to feed, not a conscience. $1 is $1. Dorothy took the tray and left in silence, the same way she'd left Karen's apartment, with the same feeling. That people choose the cheaper thing not because they don't understand the difference, but because the difference costs $1. And $1 is exactly the price of taste and a 20-year sourdough starter. 3 days later, Dale's dropped her too. "Holidays, Dorothy. People are spending on gifts, not pastries." Dorothy heard in holidays the same polite no she'd heard in Karen's after the holidays. A refusal stretched across time so the speaker wouldn't feel guilty. One outlet, gas station. 35 rolls a day. Net, about $70. From 120 to 35. From 3,600 a month to 1,500. The second oven sat silent. $350 owed to Valerie by month's end. Dorothy didn't have it. December 22nd, kitchen, evening. Notebook open to income. Numbers thinning like leaves off a tree that decided to turn winter early. Oven debt, $350. Rent, $875. Meds, $145. Jess's SAT prep, $150. The one thing she couldn't cancel, because Jess was calling her grandmother on her own now, not on holidays, but just to say the tutor praised her practice scores. The starter on the counter. Feed it or save the flour. $2.80 could buy a loaf of bread. She thought about it seriously, the way you think about things that determine whether there will be dinner, and scared herself. Because not feeding the starter meant killing it. And killing it meant admitting Greg was right, and Tammy was right, and that the cinnamon rolls were embarrassing, foolish, the delusion of an old woman who'd imagined somebody needed her. She fed the starter, went to bed, didn't sleep. 9 p.m., December 23rd. Unknown number, 4 calls in a row. She picked up.
Irene Babcock, manager, Saturday Farmers Market, Fairbanks Park.
Quick voice, 60-second decisions. Tammy at Fulton's gave me your number. Says your cinnamon rolls have half the neighbourhood losing their minds. I need a baker for the holiday market, December 28th. Free booth, but you need a food handler's permit. I don't have one. I thought you needed a commercial kitchen, inspections. No, Indiana cottage food law. Bake at home, sell direct to customers. Farmers markets, craft fairs. Food handler certificate is an online course, 2 hours, $15. Print it, bring it Saturday. I'll do it, Dorothy said, before she had time to think about whether she could. That night, on the ancient Dell laptop that took 4 minutes to boot and whose fan sounded like a small airplane, she took the course. 50 questions, storage temps, cross-contamination, hand-washing, danger zones. 28 years of health inspections meant every answer came automatically. She knew what temperature killed salmonella, how long baked goods could sit unrefrigerated, why wooden cutting boards were a violation. 50 out of 50. Printed the certificate at the library next morning, 20 cents. 2 a.m., December 28th, Saturday. Dorothy mixed dough in 2 batches. The regular bowl couldn't hold enough, so she used the stock pot from under the sink. Filling in 2 rounds, butter, brown sugar, cinnamon in the biggest bowl she owned. By 6 a.m., the first 80 stood on the counter. Golden, frosted, the apartment smelling so strong that Gene, walking his dog past the building, stopped below the 3rd floor window and stood there breathing in. By 8, another 120. 200 cinnamon rolls, 4 parchment-lined boxes. She called a cab, $12 to Fairbanks Park, loaded the boxes on the back seat, sat in front, and held one hand on the headrest the whole ride, steadying the top box on turns. The market opened at 9. Fairbanks Park was lined with canopy tents, honey, preserves, hand-knit scarves, wooden spoons, felted ornaments. The air smelled of mulled cider, pine, and roasted pecans from a man in an ear-flap hat with a portable burner on a garden cart. Pre-New Year's, Terre Haute was out. People walking between the rows, breathing steam, and sampling honey from wooden paddles. Booth 7. Dorothy laid out rolls on a clean cloth, hand-lettered a cardboard sign. Sourdough cinnamon rolls. South Vigo school recipe. $4. $4, not $3.50. This was a farmer's market. Irene walked past and gave an approving nod. Good. Don't underprice yourself. People here pay for quality. First 30 minutes. Nobody. Dorothy stood behind the table in the winter coat with frayed cuffs and felt the way she'd felt at Fulton's. Out of place. Foolish. Next to her, a woman selling fruit pies yelled, "Get 'em hot!" People bought from her, not from Dorothy. Then a man walked up. Mid-50s, work jacket, the face of someone whose wife sent him for honey. He saw the sign, South Vigo school recipe, and stopped. Read it again. Which school? South Vigo High, the cafeteria. Wait. Something shifted in his face. The way a face changes when a person hears a melody they haven't heard in 30 years. I went to South Vigo. Class of 93. You guys had cinnamon rolls. We'd line up because by 12:30 they'd be gone. Nobody's made anything like them since. I know, Dorothy said. I made them. He bought 6. Ate one standing there, biting off large pieces and chewing slowly with his eyes closed. Tasting not food, but memory. Pulled out his phone. Dave, get to Fairbanks Park. There's a lady selling cinnamon rolls, the real ones, from South Vigo. Bring cash. By 10, a line formed. 7 people, small by any standard. But for Dorothy, those 7 were 7 confirmations that she hadn't lost her mind, wasn't wasting her time, and wasn't embarrassing anyone. By 11, she'd sold 120. By 12:30, all 200. $800 gross. Minus ingredients, about 200. Minus the cab. Net, close to 590 in one morning. Irene came over as Dorothy stacked the empties. 5 people asked if you'll be back. I'm offering permanent. Every Saturday, booth 7, no fee. I need people at the gate, and your line does that. I'll be there. She stood in the park watching people leave with honey and scarves and her rolls. Cold air, pine, pecans, a bad accordion somewhere. And Dorothy realised she was smiling. For no reason. Except there was. 1st January Saturday, 250 rolls, sold out by 1. 2nd Saturday, 300. By 2 o'clock, 20 left, which she gave to the accordion player who'd been out there all morning without eating. The market became the anchor, the channel she could count on. Weekdays, Dorothy baked for the gas station, 35, and for Birch Street Bakery outlet on the east side, where the woman whose car cries had introduced her. Birch Street took 50 a day and never returned a single one. January arithmetic. Saturday market, $2.50 at $4, net about 500. Weekdays, 85 a day, 5 days, net roughly 170 daily, $8.50 a week. Monthly, about 3,900. Plus Social Security, $11.40. Just over 5,000 a month. Valerie's oven paid off the first week. Rent paid. Medications bought in full. Jess's SAT prep paid 2 months ahead. Karen came the 2nd Saturday of February, unannounced. Dorothy spotted her standing by a lamppost in a puffer coat and scarf, watching the line at her mother's booth. 5 minutes. 10. Not coming closer. Dorothy served customers, wrapped rolls, made change, and out of the corner of her eye watched her daughter watching something that didn't fit her picture of the world. Then Karen walked over, stood to the side, waited for the last customer, and said quietly, looking not at her mother but at the rolls, "Mum, I saw a video in a group chat. Someone posted it. The line, the market, you." "And?" "I didn't know you could do this." Not an apology, not "I'm sorry." Karen didn't know how. But Dorothy heard in "I didn't know" the thing she'd been waiting for since November. Not approval, not help, but recognition. Simple recognition that her mother was not a joke, not an embarrassment, but a person who could do something and who mattered. That was enough. "Have a roll," Dorothy said. "Still warm." Karen took one, bit in, chewed in silence, turned away, and Dorothy saw her raise a hand to her eyes, quickly, briefly, as if adjusting her scarf. Dorothy didn't look. There are things better left unnoticed, so as not to embarrass. And she knew this not from books, but from 30 years of living with people. That evening, Dorothy sat at the kitchen table and took from the hall closet something she hadn't touched in 12 years. A thick 3-ring binder with a grease-stained cover, pages in plastic sleeves. On the first page, in neat handwriting, recipes. South Vigo High School Cafeteria. Head cook, B. Winslow. Ms. B's binder. From the woman who'd taught young Dot the difference between a living starter and a packet of yeast, who'd let her keep the rolling pin and shown her how to roll the dough tight enough to hold but loose enough to breathe. Ms. B died in 2009 and left the binder to Dorothy, the only cook who worked with sourdough, the only one who understood why it mattered. 14 recipes: dinner rolls, buttermilk biscuits, apple hand pies, pecan sticky buns, cheese danishes, pot pie crust, cornbread, banana bread, cinnamon bread loaves, pull-apart garlic rolls, honey wheat rolls, blueberry scones, maple oat bars, and the cinnamon roll recipe she already knew by heart.
14 items no bakery in town carried, no Larissa Kowalski with her Pillsbury tubes could reproduce, because every one of them needed the sourdough starter sitting right there on the kitchen counter, alive, 20 years old, fed that morning. Dorothy closed the binder, set it next to the spiral notebook, and for the first time in many months, thought not about how to survive, but about what came next. Apple hand pies for spring, when the market would be packed. Sticky buns in summer, when the tourists came through. Dinner rolls on order for Thanksgiving. 14 recipes. 14 possibilities, each one smelling of butter and sourdough, and the time when kids came through the cafeteria line, and the lunch lady said, "Just one," and sometimes winked. Morning, kitchen, counter by the window. Dorothy lifted the cloth and opened the jar. The starter had risen overnight, pressing against the cloth, and smelled right. Tangy, warm, faintly sweet, deep. Something she couldn't name precisely, but would recognize among 1,000 smells. Same hands, same wooden spoon, same flour, 2 tablespoons. Same counter, same streetlight outside. Same Terre Haute beyond the glass, with rooftops and bare branches and chimney smoke in the cold. Everything the same, and everything different. She fed the starter, covered the jar, and went to set the dough. To wrap up this story, let's look at what Dorothy did to reach her goals and cover her needs. What did Dorothy do? First, she did the math, down to the cent. Social Security, expenses, cost per roll, markup, net profit. Arithmetic is the foundation of any income, and Dorothy started there. Because without real numbers, any plan is just a wish. Second, she didn't wait for perfect conditions. No savings, no equipment, no permission. 1 oven, 1 jar of starter, $5 in flour, and a first batch of 40. She started with what she had, not with what she didn't. Third, when her main channels collapsed, she didn't stop. Lost 2 stores, lost her driver, found herself in debt with 35 rolls instead of 120, and still found a new path. The farmer's market, a new store, a $15 food handler's permit she didn't know existed. Not one channel, but several,
so that when one closes, the others keep working. Every one of you has a skill people are willing to pay for. You might not know it, you might think it's nothing special, just something you do, but try. Take one step, do the math, offer it to a neighbour, a local shop, and you may find that the skill you thought was outdated is actually your greatest asset. Hit that like button so this story reaches the people who need it right now. And subscribe to the channel. Every week we share stories of people who found a way to live, not just survive.